And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Monday, May 16th. I'm your host for today's program. And today we go to correspondent Mark Trahant at Fort Hall, Idaho, one of our correspondents that we talk about politics with. And he's going to talk a little bit about Newt Gingrich throwing his hat into the Republican presidential field, and Newt says that some of the Medicare and Medicaid cuts that are being proposed by the Republican right wing are too radical for their party and the country. Mark Trahant, always interesting giving you a ring to get an update for the Native News Update today about legislation and other things. What do you see as the prime issues of the day? You just wrote a column this week having to do with Medicare. Tell us a little bit about that first.
Well, it's been, for the most part, the Republicans have had a pretty unified position up to this point. Paul Ryan of Wisconsin had introduced a budget that was pretty draconian in what it would do to both Medicare and Medicaid, and to children's health insurance for that matter. And all of the Republicans seem to have been pretty much lining up saying, yeah, this is what we need to do. This is the new America. Well, this weekend, all of that changed. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House and now presidential candidate, said that Paul Ryan's plan is too radical. And it's too radical for him. He doesn't want a radical program from either the right or the left. And he said, that's the problem. We need to come up with a more centrist solution. So this has just got the Republicans in a tizzy, because here's one of their own now saying their plan was just too radical.
Didn't Newt Gingrich kind of observe what was going on in some of these regions where Republicans went back home to sell the program, including Congressman Ryan, and they ended up getting a lot of flack from their elderly constituents in particular, it seems.
Right. And it's interesting that Ryan plan, he thought he would get around that by not touching it for current seniors. His plan really wipes out people my age, under 55. If you're between 45 and 55, you're just sunk under the Ryan plan. But even then, the seniors didn't want that. They just said, from pretty clear across the board, don't mess with Medicare. Now, the trustees this week came out with a report, and it said that Medicare is indeed in more financial problems than expected. It's now 5 years ahead of where they thought it would be in terms of going broke. But that said, the trustees also said what we need to do is step up the Affordable Care implementation, because cutting medical care costs is the only way that we're going to cut to make Medicare solvent. You can't do it with smoke and mirrors. You have to do it with cutting medical costs.
And that seemed to be at least part of the Obamacare program, trying to figure out how to bring more people into the umbrella to bring down overhead.
Right. The biggest problem now is what economists call free riders, and that's basically young people who are healthy who don't have any health insurance, and so you can't use them to spread the cost out into the system. And they don't sign up for health care until their costs get higher. The other interesting thing about the Republican approach to all of this is that they want to put seniors down the road into a private Medicare system, but it just doesn't work mathematically. There's no way to have an insurance company give the kind of benefits that Medicare does without some sort of subsidy.
Medicare is a program that focuses mainly on elderly people and poor people. Barely any response, it seems to me, from poor people in the country, which is not unexpected. I mean, people are upset about it, but not the kind of reaction compared to the older constituents. And why are they so protective of it if they're exempted from the immediate cuts, those 55 years and older?
Well, I think it's just fear that once the changes start, it'll be a cascade. The real genius of Medicare in 1964, when it was first passed, is that they said, let's not make this poverty-based, let's make this age-based. If you're 65, you could earn $1 million and you're still eligible. In fact, we want you on Medicare. We want you to be part of the pool. And kind of the new orthodoxy, at least from the Republicans, is to say, no, if you make a lot of money, you should be in your own private world, not be part of the American system. I mean, to me, if you look at it, if you had Medicare for everybody, we'd have a pretty damn good healthcare system. I mean, it's very good by any measure. any measure you want. Now, the other program is Medicaid, which is the poverty program. And what the Republicans want to do with that, and I'm hoping this Medicare opening will change that debate as well, is to turn it over to the states in a block grant. Indian country would lose big time in a block grant. The whole new growth area for the Indian health system is Medicaid money, and states would cut that as quickly as they possibly could if they had the option.
Is there any chance of segregating like a Indian country block grant and have them operate like a state? Is that any helpful?
I keep arguing for that. There is a provision in the Affordable Care Act that allows the Navajo Nation to be treated as a state for Medicaid purposes. I think that's ideal. I think that's the way it ought to be for all of Indian country, because states have very different interests than tribes. And I think it would be better serving Indian people if we could get that to happen. So that's certainly something that I'll be advocating and writing for in the next few years.
And that's a program now that gets shared with the state. So there's money going to the state shares a portion of the cost to that, and that's what we're hearing is people are trying to find ways to shrink that Medicaid budget portion of them, even though it's matched by the federal government, if I'm correct.
Well, and for Indian country, it's even less so because there is no state money involved. It's just state is the administrator. It's what's called a 100% FMAP. In other words, the federal government, federal matching something, I forget what the acronym stands for, but basically the federal government picks up 100% of the costs for Indian country.
Okay, interesting. Well, those two things seem to have enough people up in arms. Do we see any other things coming through the budget cuts? I mean, let's go back to the other issue. Newt Gingrich has thrown his hat into the thing. Actually, is he remaking himself as some kind of moderate all of a sudden? Does he want to become the centrist of the party?
It looks like he's trying that. It'll be interesting that there are now a dozen Republicans running. Thank God that Donald Trump is not one of them. But a dozen Republicans trying to position themselves for primary voters. So far, there's not really a heavyweight, and I'm not sure there's anyone in that field who can challenge President Obama, but that remains to be seen.
Well, Huckabee has said that he won't be running. He was toe-to-toe with Trump for a little while. Romney was toe-to-toe in the polls. Actually, they were calling him the front runner for about a week before all of a sudden he got out there and said a few things, and he seemed to slide out of sight. Is Trump out of it for sure, or is he just
Trump?
Announced?
Yeah, today he announced he will not be a candidate for the Republican nomination.
Well, narrowing the field down already. That's interesting. Okay,
yeah.
He's out of the way. Huckabee's out of the way. Does Gingrich become kind of the de facto front runner in this, the way things look? He seems to have the most name recognition other than Romney.
Although for younger voters, he hasn't been in office since the 80s, and so they never would have had a chance to vote for him. So I think I'm not sure if there really is a front runner even now. And I'm not even sure he's the centrist. John Huntsman, the former governor of Utah, was also a very centrist governor, and I think that's a mantle he could claim as well. In fact, he was in the Obama administration until last week.
Right. What was his position there? In economics or something like that, or?
He was the ambassador to China.
Oh, okay, ambassador to China. Well, I was reading something about that. Are any of the candidates emerging as anyone potential with a good grip on Indian country issues? Would Newt be the most familiar with it at this point, historically wise?
He would, and to give him credit, one area that he did work on when he was the Speaker of the House was the special diabetes program for Indians. And so he does have some background in Indian country, probably more so than the rest of the candidates combined.
We have a debt ceiling limit argument brewing here on top of all these other cuts that have been proposed. And my understanding is, again, the people on some people describe them as the radical right, the teabaggers who have come in, are demanding trillions of dollars of budget cuts in order to get their vote to maintain the debt ceiling or to raise it. What's going to happen in the next, we got 90 days before the government, I guess, starts looking like it's going to capitulate on its loan obligations. Right.
Today we actually hit the limit, and this week, and they're actually now using special funding accounting tricks to get beyond that. They're playing with liquid nitrogen. I mean, something could blow very, very easily And what concerns me as someone who cares about programs for Indian country is that if interest rates, because of this, were to go up 0.5%, 0.25%, 1%, that would wipe out any potential savings from budget cuts. And we'd be back at the very place we began. Because right now, the United States is in the very fortunate position of paying low interest rates. And what they're playing around with is challenging that environment. And if interest rates go up, all bets are off in terms of what's going to happen to the budget, because that's an area of the budget they can't control. And net interest on the debt is actually one of the fastest growing federal obligations.
Are the obligations for repayment of that, the impact of budget cuts on the interest rates, does that get passed down? If the interest rates go up for the United States, it begins impacting the banks and local lending as well. Does it move right down the line?
It'll move down the chain if that happens, yes. The United States finances the debt with bond auctions. And for some time now, they've been doing shorter term obligations because the debt interest rates were so low. You basically don't get very much at all for a 30-year treasury or a 3-year treasury. What they'll probably try to do if interest rates go up is to start negotiating for the sale of 30-year mortgage or 30-year debt bonds again. And those will have higher interest rates just because of the nature of them.
Interesting. Any windfall from the price of oil to oil-producing tribes, Oklahoma, Navajo Nation, some of the Fort Berthold who's digging, they seem to be drilling. What's the impact on that to Indian country?
Well, the impact on Indian people, I think, is pretty severe the other way because
Right.
So many of us drive pickups. So many of us have distances to travel. I mean, it's just a natural environment in rural areas that it's a very expensive part of life anyway. I was in Alaska in December in a rural village, and gas there from the one place that sold it had to come in by air was pushing $8 a gallon. So you can imagine if gas is $5 in the States, what it's going to do to a village like that. The good thing is commodity prices in general seem to be falling right now, and that could start to bring about relief at the pump, hopefully. As far as tribes that produce, sure, all producers are going to be in a good shape. It's going to help anyone that sells oil in the short term.
Well, I was looking at that. I know on the Navajo Nation, you have to have pickup trucks because you got to be able to pick up all your relatives that are walking down the side of the roadways, don't you, as you go down toward Window Rock and stuff like that?
Yeah, I get teased because I have a little pickup, and they say, what's the reason? There's no reason for it. Either get a big one or
Yeah, all right. No, I understand that. It may have to go back to the day where we see a lot of tribal people, and we already see some of that on this reservation here, where a lot of tribal people are walking. They simply cannot afford. They've run out of fuel as winter came to a close, and people are struggling with that, and it's only going to get higher. So hopefully, I know the Navajo Nation now is tied to the OPEC price by the barrel, so their budget availability seems to me to be gauged based on what world oil prices are. Well, let's talk to you again next week about
right.
why tribes
But
ought
far
to
more impacted.
have foreign policies.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks again, Mark, for checking in with us.
Okay.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to say thank you for showing up. Come back again soon.